I'm taking a break from my Christmas preparations here to enjoy a slice of my beautiful Keto Yule log cake, or bûche de Noël Keto. Bûche de Noël is a traditional French holiday dessert, usually served at the end of the Christmas meal. People in Francophone countries know all about this, of course, and I'm sure you've seen them before if you've never served one. What we've got here basically is a chocolate sponge cake that's filled with a kind of cheesecake-like filling, rolled up and then covered with a beautiful, luxurious chocolate ganache. And it's made into sort of a log shape, so it resembles a log, and it's very pretty. And I think you're going to be very surprised by this recipe for a number of reasons. And the first one is how easy it is to make. Now, I say it's easy to make, but it does take some patience. You have to start this recipe the day before you plan to prepare the cake, because there's one of the elements that you can't buy in a grocery store, at least as far as I know, and that's yogurt cheese. Now, you may be asking yourself already, yogurt cheese? Why yogurt cheese? Well, what I wanted to do when I created this recipe was reduce the number of calories enough to make satisfying portions that you could easily work into your daily macros. Yogurt cheese has no carbohydrates, no fat. Yogurt cheese has very few calories as well, unlike cream cheese. And so this is the way I decided to make a major reduction in the number of calories. And that means that you get a nice, big, satisfying portion when you get this. The other thing you're just going to love about this recipe are the macros for it. This is really kind of surprising. You know, it's hard to make desserts, to make keto desserts that don't have as many calories as a whole meal. And you know this if you've looked on the web and you go through all kinds of beautiful keto desserts. And if you read the recipes carefully, you find out the portion sizes are often very, very small, or they have a lot of calories, or they don't list that information, probably for a reason. But check this out. The whole recipe, and this is a big rolled cake, right? It comes down to 2,453.5 calories, 43 grams of net carbs, 126 grams of protein, and 181.5 grams of fat. Not bad, right? For me, this recipe makes 12 nice big portions, and each one only has 204.5 calories, 3.6 grams of net carbs, 10.5 grams of protein, and 15 grams of fat. I think that's pretty impressive, and I got to tell you that I'm really kind of proud of this recipe. I also hope that you'll try this recipe and that you'll have an occasion to serve it to guests and to family, or maybe to make one as a gift for someone. This is really lovely, and it's really just a lot of fun to make, I think. Tell you what, come on into the kitchen with me and I'll show you. The day before you prepare this recipe, start by making the yogurt cheese you'll need for the filling. Here I've got a quart, that's a liter of non-fat, plain Greek yogurt. And what I'm going to do to make the cheese, which actually ends up being pretty much like cream cheese, only lower in calories and fat. And that was the goal of using this in the first place. You could, of course, use cream cheese in place of it, but you'll just have to recalculate the macros. Anyway, what we're going to do is just drain the whey out of it. To do that, I've got a sieve here that I'm placing over a container. This is a big measuring cup. You can use anything you like for this. I'm going to line it with some cheesecloth. Next, add in the yogurt. Make sure you get all of it there. And then simply fold the corners of the cheesecloth over the top like this. There we go. And wait for 24 hours. Now, here's one I prepared yesterday, and I'll show you what it looks like. It's really just a blob of white cheese now. And before we use it, let's just make sure we've gotten as much of the whey out as possible. What I'm going to do is gather up the cheesecloth like this, give it a twist, and give it a squeeze fairly gently. We don't want to squeeze it out through the cheesecloth, but if there's any whey left, it'll come out in a little stream just like that. And there we have it. Preheat your oven to 375 degrees, that's 190 Celsius, and prepare a sheet pan with some parchment paper, or you could use a Silpat for this as well. I'm going to set this aside for the moment. Let's begin by mixing together our dry ingredients. Here I've got 60 grams, that's 9 tablespoons of lupin flour. Now, if your question is, can I replace this with almond flour? You can use the same amount of almond flour. Next, we're going to add in 60 grams of powdered erythritol. I'm also going to add in 3 tablespoons, that's 21 grams, of cocoa powder. This ingredient is optional, but I think it really brings out the flavor of chocolate. Here I've got a teaspoon of instant coffee. Next, a half a teaspoon of salt. 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum. In it goes. Mix it up. And there you have it. Let's move on to the wet ingredients. Here in this bowl, I've got 6 egg yolks. The whites, set them aside. We're going to whip them into stiff peaks later on. To this, I'm going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. I'm also going to add in 4 tablespoons, that's 1/4 cup, of water. Let's mix the dry and wet ingredients together next. Nothing to it. If you find your mix is too dry, add a little bit of water. This seems a little thick to me, so I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon of water. About. We want this to be thick, but we want it to be thin enough to combine later on with our stiffly beaten egg whites. Here you see I've added in another tablespoon or so of water. There's my oven preheated. I think that's pretty nice right there. This we're going to set aside while we beat our egg whites. Here in the bowl of my stand mixer, I've got 6 egg whites, and to this I'm going to add just a pinch of kosher salt and a half a teaspoon of lemon juice. This will help stabilize our egg whites once they're beaten to stiff peaks. I'm going to attach a little tool. And there we have it. Let's have a look. You can tell when your egg whites are stiffly beaten when they hold their shape on the end of your whisk, just like that. To make it easier to mix our chocolate mixture with our egg whites, we're going to start by taking about 1/4 of the egg whites and combining them with this very thick chocolate mixture. This is really simple. You just stir it from the bottom up. This will deflate the egg whites a little bit, so don't worry about that. We're going to add our chocolate mixture in by thirds or so and just fold it in to our egg whites. Try not to deflate them too much. And you just keep going on until the mixture is well incorporated. Now remember that baking sheet covered with parchment paper? We're going to put our mixture right on the parchment paper. I like to put it right in the middle. I'm going to get all of that out of there. Just about there. I don't like to leave anything behind. And there we go. Now what we want to do next is simply spread this out into a relatively even rectangular shape that covers most of the parchment paper, gently so as not to deflate it more than necessary. And you want to keep it in a nice even layer, just like this. And there you pretty much have it, right? This is ready now to go into our 375 degree Fahrenheit oven, that's 190 Celsius, for 20 minutes. While our cake is in the oven, let's prepare something to help us roll our cake up without cracking it. Here I've got a clean kitchen towel that I've wetted just quickly under the faucet, and I wrang it out like this, right? Just moist, damp, not wringing wet, right? I'm going to spread this out here on the counter. I'm going to cover that with a sheet of parchment paper about the same size as our cake. Now our cake is done. Really nice, right? Now here what we're going to do is we're going to flip it. I'm going to make it easy by doing it in a really simple way here. First, we're going to put our sheet of parchment paper on top. Next, the kitchen towel. Boy, that paper really wants to curl up, doesn't it? And next, a metal rack. And then with two hot pads, we're going to easily just turn this right over. Just remove the baking sheet. And very carefully, the parchment paper covering our cake. And there we go. Next, we're going to roll this up from one short end to the other. Just roll it right on up, pretty tightly actually. And then we're going to leave this to cool completely right here, just like this, before we fill it. While we wait for the cake to cool off, let's make our filling. Starts off with our yogurt cheese. We're going to use all of it. This is about a pound or 450 grams. In it goes. Here I've also added in one stick, that's 112 grams, of softened butter. Now we're going to mix them together really well. Stop at least once to scrape down the bottom of the bowl to make sure we get everything all nicely incorporated here. To this, we're going to add a tablespoon of vanilla extract. A pinch of salt. We're also going to add in 1 cup, that's 120 grams, of powdered erythritol. I'm just going to add half of it in. You want to go slowly at first, or you're going to have a big cloud of powdered erythritol, and we don't want that. When that's well mixed in, add in the rest of the erythritol. It's always a good idea to scrape the bowl down at least once to make sure that all of the ingredients get well incorporated. And this part is really essential. You should taste it to make sure that it's sweet enough for you before you stop. It's been about 2 hours since we took the cake out of the oven, and now it's thoroughly cooled and ready to fill. First we have to unroll it. Not terribly difficult, as you can see. And let's add our filling. The idea, of course, is to spread this in as even a layer as possible. Be careful, we don't want to make cracks or break the cake. Take your time, it's not a race. And there we have it. The rest is really easy. Check it out. And there it is. Isn't it beautiful? Just going to smooth it down a little bit. Now, the next step is to leave this in the refrigerator for about an hour to let the filling firm up, and that'll make it easier to do the frosting, which is actually a really beautiful ganache. Making a ganache is really super easy. Here in this bowl, I've got 6 ounces, that's 170 grams more or less, of chopped sugar-free chocolate. And I'll put my recipe for sugar-free chocolate here on the screen. Just click on the link that you see. And to this, I'm going to add a half a cup, that's 125 milliliters of heavy whipping cream. Now all we have to do really is melt the chocolate and heat up the cream. So what I've done is I've prepared a water bath, or a double boiler I guess you could call it. I brought an inch of water to boil in this pan, and here what I'm going to do is just set this glass bowl on top of it and wait for the chocolate to melt. Here it's been about 25 minutes since I set my chocolate here on top of the bain-marie for it to melt, and now it's perfectly smooth and lovely. It's exactly what we want to finish off our cake. To finish our cake, I'm going to transfer it to a cutting board so that we have a different surface to work on here. It's a little easier than this plate. And the first thing we're going to do in order to make a bûche de Noël or Yule log out of it is we're going to cut the ends off. You notice the ends are kind of imperfect and a little weird. We can actually use them for a decoration. Let me show you. I'm going to cut off about an inch thickness or so from each end. Isn't that pretty? What we're going to do next is use these ends, and we're going to take the end that's not pretty, and we're going to stick these on the sides as if they were branches that came out of our log, right? Not bad. And then we're going to cover all of this with ganache. I'm going to use some ganache as glue to help it adhere to the log better. I really think that's just lovely. Now, here I'm going to use my offset spatula to help me cover the cake as neatly as possible. And here, as you can see, I've managed to cover the cake with the ganache, and let me just show you the sides. I think it really looks great. Notice how the ganache was thick enough to make almost a bark-like pattern on our log. You can also add some texture by using a fork to make a pattern along your log, but I think this is so pretty, I'm going to leave it just like that. Listen, before you go, don't forget to like, share, comment, and especially subscribe to my channel. Helps my channel grow, and it helps you find my videos, especially if you click on that notifications bell. Thanks so much for joining us here today at Tim Talks Cooking, huh? We'll catch you next time.